Imagine you've got this incredibly complex, life-threatening mechanical issue inside a sealed engine.
Right, like a locked box.
Exactly. You can't open it up. You can't look inside. You have to figure out exactly which valves are failing and which pipes are completely blocked. But there's one major catch to this whole scenario. You cannot hear the engine running.
Which is a massive problem. Because in this situation, you are completely, profoundly deaf.
Right. And now reveal that the engine you are trying to fix isn't made of steel at all.
Yeah.
It's not filled with oil. It's a baby's heart.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So, welcome to today's deep dive. We are taking you on a sweeping biographical journey today based on some incredible historical sources looking into the life of Helen Brooke Taussig.
Her story is unbelievable.
It really is. The goal of our deep dive today is to explore how this woman took intense personal hardships plus the rampant systemic sexism of her era and somehow turned all of that into a unique medical superpower.
Yeah, she's the foundational figure in pediatric cardiology. She solved the unsolvable blue baby syndrome, basically by mapping the heart with her bare fingertips, and then later prevented a global medical catastrophe.
Right, which we will definitely get into.
Yeah.
But first, to really appreciate the magnitude of what she pulled off, we should probably set the scene. What did the medical landscape even look like in the early 20th century?
Well, it was bleak, honestly. If you were a cardiologist back then, your entire focus was almost exclusively on infections, specifically rheumatic fever.
Because that was a huge source of child mortality at the time.
Exactly. But congenital heart defects, meaning structural plumbing problems that a baby is actually born with, they were just viewed as hopeless, like tragic curiosities.
Because they couldn't just open up the chest and fix it?
No, not at all. The surgical tools to operate on a beating heart simply didn't exist yet. So if a baby was born with a malformed heart, the medical consensus was essentially just a shrug. Yeah, it was an automatic death sentence. Doctors were basically taught to just make the infants as comfortable as possible.
It's just wild to think she revolutionized cardiology when the medical establishment, and honestly her own biology, were actively conspiring to keep her out of a hospital entirely. I mean, her early life was just a relentless series of obstacles.
It really was. She was born in 1898 in Massachusetts, and her childhood was just immediately marked by tragedy. When she was 11, she lost her mother to tuberculosis.
Oh, man.
That's awful.
And shortly after that, Helen contracted TB herself. So this illness kept her bedridden, completely disrupted her early schooling for years. And on top of that, she was battling severe dyslexia.
In an era where educational accommodations basically didn't exist, you were just labeled as slow.
Exactly. But if you're keeping track of the hurdles here, we also have to add that she developed this progressive ear infection in childhood.
Right.
And over the years, that infection systematically destroyed her hearing, eventually leaving her completely deaf by early adulthood. It's like being forced to run a marathon with weights tied to your ankles. But instead of quitting, she just, invents a completely new way of running. Her intellect was undeniable.
Oh, absolutely. Despite the illness, the reading difficulties, the failing hearing, she still graduates from UC Berkeley in 1921.
Which is huge.
Huge. And then she sets her sights on Harvard Medical School. But here she hits this massive systemic wall. Harvard accepted women at this time, but only in theory.
Wait, what does that mean? In theory?
Well, they would let women take the classes, but they absolutely refused to grant them a medical degree.
So you do all the grueling work, pass all the horrific exams, pay the tuition, but you don't get the diploma. You literally just don't get to be a doctor.
Exactly. So she pivots to Boston University to take classes in histology, bacteriology, anatomy. But even there, picture this environment. The discrimination was incredibly blatant.
How bad was it?
She was physically forced to sit at the very back of the lecture hall, totally separated from the male students, and she was strictly forbidden to speak to them.
Think about being in her shoes for a second. You are losing your hearing, which means you desperately need to be near the front of the room to read the professor's lips.
Right.
But instead, you are banished to the back row, isolated, silenced. But again, rather than quitting, she just figures out a way around it.
Yeah.
While sitting in the back of that room, she manages to conduct original research and actually publishes her first scientific paper.
On ox heart muscles, yeah.
Mm.
Her professors recognized her brilliance and essentially told her, you're wasting your time here. This institution won't credential you.
So where did she go?
They encouraged her to transfer to Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine. That was one of the incredibly rare schools actually admitting women as full-degree candidates. So she applies, she gets accepted.
Okay, a win, finally.
Sort of. Her dream was to study internal medicine, but at Johns Hopkins they had a strict quota. There was literally only one single position available for a woman in that specialization, and it was already taken.
She gets boxed out again.
She does. So she's basically forced into pediatrics.
Which is fascinating, though, because being rejected from internal medicine and forced into the pediatrics ward ended up being arguably the luckiest break in medical history. It put her exactly where she needed to be.
To encounter her life's great medical puzzle, yeah. By 1930, she had risen to become the chief of the Harriet Lane Home, which was the pediatric clinic there at Johns Hopkins.
And this is where she started seeing these patients known as blue babies.
Right. It sounds like a dark fairy tale, but it was a horrifying reality for these parents. These were infants suffering from severe cyanosis.
Meaning they were literally turning a dark purplish blue color because their blood was completely starved of oxygen.
Exactly. And often this was caused by a complex heart defect known as Tetralogy of Fallot. To put it simply, their hearts were structurally malformed in a way that prevented them from pumping enough blood into the lungs.
So they can't pick up oxygen.
Right. The blood was just bypassing the lungs entirely and recirculating that deoxygenated blue blood right back into the body.
And here is where the deafness becomes such a critical part of the story. If you ever used a standard stethoscope, you know it's an acoustic instrument. Doctors use it to listen to murmurs, the whoosh of blood, to figure out what's mechanically wrong.
But Taussig can't do that.
Exactly. She's lip-reading just to communicate with the parents. So to diagnose these babies, she relies entirely on her hands.
Because she couldn't hear the acoustic sounds, she trained her sense of touch to this almost superhuman degree. She learned to feel the mechanical vibrations of the heartbeat directly through the infant's chest wall.
I think cardiologists call those thrills, right?
Yeah, thrills. If you think about a river, when the water flows over a smooth bed, it's quiet. But if you put a jagged rock in the middle of it, the water churns and creates rapids.
That makes total sense.
The heart is the same way. When blood is forced through a narrowed, malformed valve, it creates a turbulent, vibrating rush. And you can actually feel it if your fingers are sensitive enough.
She's essentially acting like a safecracker. Instead of listening to the clicks, she's feeling the tumblers shift inside the chest. She's using those subtle vibrations to build a three-dimensional model of the heart defect in her mind.
She is mapping anatomical blockages with her bare fingertips. It's incredible.
Oh, wait, diagnosing a plumbing issue by touch is amazing, sure. But diagnosing is one thing, fixing it is another entirely. How did feeling a heartbeat actually lead to a surgical blueprint?
Well, it comes down to her ability to spot patterns that everyone else missed. Through these tactile exams, Taussig made a brilliant kind of paradoxical observation.
Okay, what was it?
She noticed that a small subset of these blue babies actually survived longer. They had less severe cyanosis, they were generally healthier, but here was the catch. They were healthier because they were born with an additional heart defect.
Wait, a second defect keeping them alive?
Yeah.
How does the plumbing even work on that?
So it revolves around a temporary blood vessel called the patent ductus arteriosus. Let's look at fetal biology for a second. Before a baby is born, their lungs are filled with fluid, not air.
Right, because they get all their oxygen from the mother's placenta.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the fetal heart has this built-in detour, the ductus arteriosus. This little vessel bypasses the uninflated lungs entirely and shoots the blood straight out to the rest of the body.
Oh, I see.
And once a baby is born and takes its first breath of air, that detour naturally closes up within a few weeks. That forces all the blood to finally go through the lungs to get oxygen.
So the plumbing naturally reroutes itself for life outside the womb.
But in a child with Tetralogy of Fallot, remember, their normal pathway to the lungs is severely blocked. So as long as that fetal detour, the ductus arteriosus, stays open or patent, a little bit of blood can actually sneak backwards through it.
And get to the lungs to pick up oxygen. It keeps them alive.
Yes. But when nature takes its course, and that fetal detour naturally seals itself shut a few weeks after birth, the baby's only oxygen supply is cut off. Their oxygen levels plummet and they turn blue.
So she essentially realizes that two wrongs can make a right. A broken heart valve plus an open duct equals a living baby. And she decides she wants to intentionally recreate that second wrong to save them. She wants to surgically build an artificial detour.
Her logic was flawless. Build a bypass, a shunt to get the blood back to the lungs, but remember the era. This is the 1940s. Operating on a tiny, rapidly beating, fragile baby's heart was considered absolute madness.
Right. Nobody was doing this.
Nobody. She pitched her artificial detour idea to a top surgeon in Boston, Robert Gross, and he literally scoffed at her. His exact complaint was that he already had enough trouble trying to close vessels that were supposed to be shut. He certainly wasn't going to try to build a brand new one.
So typical.
Yeah.
But she doesn't take no for an answer. She heads back to Baltimore and approaches the new chief of surgery at Johns Hopkins, Alfred Blalock. And critically, she also teams up with Vivien Thomas.
Yeah, we have to highlight Vivien Thomas here because his role was tragically erased for decades. Thomas was Blalock's laboratory assistant, and he was an absolute surgical genius.
But he was African American.
Yes. And because of the severe racial segregation and institutional racism of the 1940s, he was officially classified and paid as a janitor.
Oh my God.
Despite the fact that he was conducting highly advanced postdoctoral level surgical research.
The disparity is just staggering. Paying a surgical pioneer a janitor's wage.
It is, and Thomas's input in designing the miniature surgical instruments required for an infant's chest, plus his work perfecting the incredibly delicate suturing technique, it was absolutely vital.
He was the one figuring out the actual physical mechanics of Taussig's idea.
Exactly. For a long time, the procedure was known only as the Blalock-Taussig shunt, completely overlooking Thomas because of his race and his non-clinical role. Today, history has been corrected, and it is rightfully known as the Blalock-Thomas-Taussig shunt.
And they had to practice this relentlessly before they ever touched a human patient. They performed experimental surgeries on about 200 dogs.
Which is a massive undertaking.
Seriously, if you think about the mechanics of trying to stitch together blood vessels the size of a matchstick while the heart is still pumping, it took immense trial and error to figure out how to clamp the vessels without stopping the heart entirely.
And then, in November 1944, they are faced with their first human patient.
Eileen Saxon.
Yes, she was just 15 months old. And to give you a sense of how severe her condition was, she weighed only 5 kilograms.
Wait, that is roughly the weight of a standard bag of flour for a 15-month-old.
Yes, she was severely, dangerously underweight. She was a deep purplish blue, and she was gasping for breath just trying to drink a single sip of milk.
That is heartbreaking.
Taussig examined her using her tactile method, feeling the thrills through her chest, and diagnosed her with Tetralogy of Fallot. Without immediate intervention, Eileen was going to suffocate to death.
So they go to the operating room. Blalock is the lead surgeon, but Vivien Thomas is actually standing on a step stool right behind him, actively guiding him step by step through the procedure they had spent months perfecting.
They open her chest, they construct the artificial shunt suturing an artery that normally goes to the arm directly into the pulmonary artery to force blood into the lungs.
And the moment they unclamp that newly built bypass, it works. Right there on the operating table, Eileen turns from a dying, suffocating blue to a healthy, vibrant pink.
Taussig later recalled that nothing in her entire life would ever give her as much pure delight as seeing those bright pink cheeks and bright red lips appear on that baby in the operating room.
It gives you chills. Now, it is important to note from the sources we're reviewing that Eileen Saxon tragically passed away a few months later because her underlying condition was just too severe. But the surgical proof of concept was absolutely undeniable.
That single moment shattered the medical dogma of the era. It proved definitively that congenital heart defects were not an automatic death sentence.
So what happened next? Did other doctors start trying it?
Oh, the floodgates completely opened. This was a global medical revolution practically overnight. Desperate parents from all over the world who had been told there was zero hope for their children started flocking to Baltimore.
Just carrying their blue babies to this one hospital.
Yeah. The clinic was completely overwhelmed. But by 1951, the team had performed over 1,000 of these surgeries. And they had dropped the mortality rate for this condition from basically 100% down to just 5%.
Try to put yourself in the shoes of a parent in 1948 being told your child has a 95% chance of living a normal life instead of a 100% chance of dying. The human impact of this is just impossible to overstate.
It really is.
And for Taussig, this wasn't just about publishing papers or abstract surgical theory. It was about giving these children their childhoods back. For years, she kept this letter displayed on her mantelpiece from a 12-year-old boy in France named Jean-Pierre Cablon.
Oh, I read about that.
Yeah, he'd traveled to get the surgery. And he wrote to her afterwards saying, "I am now a completely new boy. I will be able to play with the other children." That right there is the whole point of medicine.
It changed the trajectory of millions of lives, and Taussig cemented her academic legacy alongside her clinical one. In 1947, she published Congenital Malformations of the Heart.
Which was basically the founding text of the field, right?
It wasn't just a textbook. It basically created the entire field of pediatric cardiology from scratch. She mapped out anomalies no one else had ever bothered to categorize.
And she got recognized for it.
She did. She became the second woman ever to reach full professor at Johns Hopkins. She even co-discovered a completely different, incredibly complex heart condition called Taussig-Bing syndrome.
What's that one?
It's where the aorta connects to the wrong ventricle. She was just an absolute diagnostic powerhouse.
Now, you would think that inventing a whole new medical field, breaking down systemic gender barriers, and saving tens of thousands of lives would be enough for one lifetime. You take your massive wins, you enjoy your status, and you retire.
You'd think so.
But 2 decades later, in the early 1960s, her relentless curiosity and her investigative instincts were suddenly required on a global scale.
Right. In the early 1960s, a terrifying medical mystery began unfolding in Europe. There was a sudden, massive spike in babies being born with severe limb deformities.
This was a condition called phocomelia, right?
Yes, phocomelia. Infants were being born with limbs that were absent or severely underdeveloped, sometimes hands attached directly to the shoulders. This was previously an incredibly rare genetic anomaly, but suddenly it was turning into a full-blown epidemic.
And she hears a rumor about this from one of her former students in 1962. But wait, I'm stuck on something here. She's a pediatric cardiologist in Maryland. She focuses on the structural plumbing of the heart. Why is she flying to Germany to investigate a limb deformity epidemic?
Well, because she was the undisputed master of congenital defects. When you spend 30 years studying how fetuses develop incorrectly, you understand embryology better than anyone else alive.
Oh, that makes sense. She knows how the body is built.
Exactly. When she gets to Germany, she meets with a local pediatrician named Widukind Lenz, and Lenz strongly suspected that the cause wasn't a virus or genetics, but a very popular over-the-counter sleeping and morning sickness pill called thalidomide.
And she doesn't just take his word for it, does she?
No. Taussig systematically examines the babies herself, reviews the clinical data, and uses her deep understanding of fetal development to confirm his suspicions.
So how was a sleeping pill causing missing arms and legs?
It had to do with the precise timing of embryology. Taussig and others realized that if a pregnant woman took thalidomide during a highly specific 20-day window early in her pregnancy, specifically when the fetus's blood vessels were just starting to form in the limb buds, the drug blocked those vessels from developing.
So without blood flow, the limbs simply couldn't grow.
Exactly. And if a woman took the pill before or after that specific window, the baby was perfectly fine.
Wow. And once she realizes the mechanics of this tragedy, she doesn't just sit around and wait for European regulators to slowly deliberate. She immediately flies back to the United States and essentially turns herself into a human shield against the pharmaceutical industry.
She had the absolute moral authority and the towering scientific reputation to force people to listen. She didn't just write a polite letter to the FDA.
Right, she goes to war.
She launched an aggressive, massive public pressure campaign. She testified before Congress. She wrote urgent warnings in major medical journals like JAMA. She spoke loudly and forcefully at national medical conferences.
Because the drug manufacturer was actively petitioning the FDA for approval to sell thalidomide in the United States at that very moment.
Yes. But Taussig, working alongside FDA reviewer Francis Kelsey, provided the undeniable clinical ammunition to stop it. She succeeded in blocking the drug in the U.S., and her very public crusade helped get it rapidly banned in Europe as well.
Preventing an immeasurable amount of suffering. It's staggering to think about her footprint on history. She is the mind behind the surgical shunt that saved the blue babies, and she is the political and scientific shield that stopped thalidomide.
And she maintained that relentless pace for the rest of her life. She formally retired from Johns Hopkins in 1963, but she went on to publish 41 more scientific papers after her retirement.
Which is over a third of her total career output, done while she was supposedly taking it easy.
She remained deeply engaged in the scientific and political world. As a matter of historical fact, the sources show she used her immense platform to advocate for several causes she firmly believed in throughout the 60s and 70s.
Like what?
She campaigned for legalized abortion. She was a strong proponent for the expansion of palliative and hospice care. And given her background with those 200 dog surgeries, she frequently advocated for the necessity of animal research and making life-saving medical advancements.
She was just always working.
She was actually still conducting active research well into her 80s, studying the genetic basis for congenital heart defects in birds at the University of Delaware.
Which makes the end of her story feel profoundly sudden. On May 20, 1986, just 4 days before her 88th birthday, she was doing what she always did, helping others.
Yeah.
She was driving a group of friends to vote in a local election when her car was struck at an intersection. She passed away shortly after arriving at the hospital.
It's incredibly sad. But true to her life's singular mission of advancing medical science, her final act was donating her body to Johns Hopkins for study.
Wow. Even at the very end.
The honors she accumulated over her lifetime are almost too numerous to list. She received the Presidential Medal of Freedom from Lyndon B. Johnson in 1964. She shattered yet another glass ceiling when she became the first woman ever elected president of the American Heart Association. She earned over 20 honorary degrees.
But if you look past the medals and the titles, her true legacy is literally walking around every single day. There are tens of thousands of people alive right now because of her shunt, and countless more living with full mobility because of her thalidomide crusade.
Absolutely.
You step back and look at the complete arc of Helen Brooke Taussig's life. There's a profound paradox sitting right at the center of it. Her greatest medical breakthroughs actually stemmed from the very things society viewed as her absolute limitations.
That's a great point.
Think about it. Her gender kept her out of internal medicine, which forced her into the pediatrics ward, which is exactly where she met the blue babies. Her severe deafness forced her to abandon the standard stethoscope, meaning she had to adapt and diagnose by touch.
Which changed everything.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That adaptation gave her a literal, physical feel for the heart's hidden structures, a tactile blueprint that no hearing doctor of her era could conceptualize because they were too busy relying on their ears. She had to feel the engine precisely because she couldn't hear it.
It's almost poetic.
It really is. Which leaves you with a final thought to mull over today as you go about your week. What perceived limitation or disadvantage in your own life might actually be uniquely positioning you to see a problem from an angle that no one else can?
I love that.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning, keep exploring, and we'll see you next time.